My fiance said, I can't build an empire with a man who's content with just a salary. She said it in front of her parents, demanding $50,000 for her vision. I just looked at her and said, you're right, I'm not an empire builder. Then I stopped arguing, and I started my own quiet project. 3 weeks later, at our own engagement party, she watched as my content analysis publicly dismantled her entire fraudulent empire piece by piece. To understand what happened at that dinner, you have to understand the man I was. My name is Liam, I'm 32 years old, and my world is built on data. As a data scientist, I don't believe in gut feelings. I believe in patterns, probabilities, and the cold, hard logic of numbers. My life was a reflection of that. Stable job, a well-managed investment portfolio, and a 3-year relationship with my fiancée Chloe. I thought our future was a predictable, positive trajectory. I had bought a penthouse, a home I was building for us, and our wedding was on the horizon. Everything was tracking perfectly according to plan. But about 3 months ago, a new variable was introduced into the equation. His name was Julian. Chloe met him at some marketing seminar and came back different. She started using words like synergy mindset and scaling our brand. Our brand. I thought our brand was just us. Suddenly, my job, the one that paid for her luxury sales career and the roof over our heads, became a source of shame. She'd say things like, it's a good job, Liam, but is it a legacy job? Or you're so smart with code, but are you smart with capital? It was subtle at first, like a rounding error in a massive data set. Annoying, but not critical. Until she brought me Julian's opportunity. It was a real estate project, a luxury resort development in some up-and-coming coastal town. She presented it to me with the fervor of a true believer, her eyes shining. She said Julian, her new business mentor, had given her an exclusive in. All it required was an initial investment of $50,000. A $50,000 down payment on our empire, as she called it. The money wasn't the issue. I had it set aside from an inheritance my grandfather left me. The problem was the data. I'm a data scientist. I analyze risk for a living. And this project was a sea of red flags. I asked for the prospectus. She handed me a glossy brochure with stock photos. I asked for the legal paperwork, the permits, the zoning approvals. She said Julian was fast-tracking all of that and we needed to get in before the paperwork was public. She said the project promised a 40% return in the first year. A number so absurd, so statistically improbable, that my professional instincts screamed scam. I told her it was too risky. I said no. That's when she started her campaign. It started with disappointment. Then it morphed into lectures about my scarcity mindset. She said I didn't believe in her, that I was threatened by her ambition. The final move was the dinner. She arranged a celebratory dinner with her parents, Robert and Susan, at a Michelin star restaurant. It's to officially announce our wedding date, she said. I thought it was a peace offering. I was wrong. It was an ambush. We were halfway through the main course when Chloe brought up the project again, framing it as our next big move. Her father, a successful man in his own right, was intrigued. I calmly explained my position, laying out the data points, the lack of documentation, the unrealistic returns. I wasn't attacking her, I was simply presenting my analysis, and that's when she did it. In front of her parents, in the hushed, expensive silence of that restaurant, she looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. She said, you see, Dad, this is what I have to deal with. His spreadsheets and his probabilities. She turned to me. Liam, I love you, but you're just a programmer. You think in lines of code. You can't see the big picture. She took a sip of wine. I need a man who can build an empire with me, not someone who's content just building an algorithm. Her mother nodded sympathetically. Her father looked at me, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Empires are built on risk. Chloe continued her voice, gaining confidence. They're built by visionaries, not by salaried employees who are afraid to leave their comfort zone. I can't build my future on a foundation of adequacy. Then came the final blow, the words that would echo for weeks. You're a good man, Liam, but you're an employee. You're just someone who settles for less. And I'm starting to realize I need a partner, not just a provider. Her insult hung in the air of my car on the drive home, but it wasn't anger I felt. It was clarity. Like a complex dataset I'd been struggling with for months had finally rendered a clean, simple graph. Her words weren't a slip of the tongue. They were a press release, a mission statement. She didn't just think I was inadequate. She had built an entire future philosophy around it. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to raise my voice, to get defensive, to prove her right, that I was an emotional, unsophisticated man who couldn't handle her ambition. I decided not to give her the satisfaction. And just then, a paradoxical truth hit me. We're taught that strength is confrontation, that you have to argue to win. But there's a greater power, the power to choose not to engage. The silent exit isn't an act of defeat. It's the ultimate strategy of someone who realizes the game is no longer worth their energy. By refusing to participate in her drama, I wasn't surrendering. I was disarming her. I was taking away her greatest weapon, the argument she craved. Her insults were meaningless if I didn't react to them. The only way to win this game was to calmly walk away from her chessboard, taking my king, my self-respect with me, and leaving her alone with the empty game she had created. Understanding that my next moves became crystal clear. The next morning, while she was at her spin class, I started my own game. Then I called my family's lawyer. I framed it as a hypothetical question about protecting premarital assets. He understood immediately. Then I went to a completely different bank, one she had never heard of, and opened a new private account. Then I contacted a private investigator. My lawyer recommended a guy who specialized in financial and background checks. I transferred $5,000 from my inheritance to his firm. The brief was simple and direct. I want to know everything about a man named Julian and his professional and personal relationship with my fiancée, Chloe. For the next 2 weeks, I became the man she accused me of being quiet, agreeable peace. I played the part of the defeated boyfriend who had accepted his mediocrity. She'd come home from her business meetings with Julian, her eyes sparkling with excitement about their empire. She'd tell me about their plans, the projections, the unstoppable momentum. I just nod. That sounds great, Chloe. I'd say I'm happy you're pursuing your dreams. She thought she had broken me. She thought she had won. She had no idea that while she was talking, I was running a background process, a silent script collecting data in the dark. While she was describing her imaginary future, my phone would vibrate with a notification, an email from the investigator. It became a quiet ritual. She'd talk about scaling her brand, and I'd read about Julian's past. The reports were devastatingly efficient. First, the photos. Chloe and Julian at a hotel bar downtown 2 days after the dinner. It wasn't a business meeting. His hand was on the small of her back. Too low for a mentor? Too familiar for a colleague? A week later, another set of photos. Them leaving a different hotel in the middle of the afternoon. Then came the financial data. Julian had no registered business, no LLC, no license. The resort development was nothing more than a slick website built on a template using stolen architectural renderings from a project in another country. And then the final piece of data, the one that made everything fall into place. The investigator sent me Julian's public records. He wasn't a visionary, he wasn't a mentor, he was a convicted felon. 2 prior charges for fraud, 1 for embezzlement. Chloe wasn't the co-founder of an empire, she was the lead investor in a scam. And my $50,000 was supposed to be the seed money. She thought I was just an employee. She was about to find out what a real data analysis looked like. My surrender at that dinner table was the fuel Chloe's ego desperately needed. In her mind, she hadn't just won an argument, she had won the war for the future of our relationship. My quiet agreement, you're right, was to her a signed treaty of unconditional surrender. I had finally accepted my place as the stable, boring foundation upon which she would build her magnificent, glittering empire. The condescending pats on my arm returned. The "oh, Liam, you wouldn't understand, it's a business thing" comments became more frequent. She was treating me less like a partner and more like a legacy system, old, reliable, but ultimately in need of being phased out. Her world in the 2 weeks that followed became the Chloe and Julian show. The business meetings that once had a veneer of plausibility now stretched late into the evenings. She'd come home past 11, her hair slightly messy, smelling of expensive wine and a cologne that was definitely not mine. Julian and I had a major breakthrough with the zoning commission she'd announce, dropping her $5,000 handbag on the counter. I knew from the investigator's report that her breakthrough had happened in a suite at the Four Seasons, and the only commission involved was the one the hotel charged for room service. I'd just nod. That's fantastic news. I'd say while scrolling through the timestamped photos on my phone. She became bolder, more brazen. She started leaving Julian's business proposals on the coffee table filled with buzzwords and circular logic, probably hoping I'd see them and feel intimidated by their intellectual firepower. I'd pick them up, scan the pages, and see nothing but a masterclass in deception. I had to give him credit. The forgery was impressive. but a forgery is still a forgery. Her social media became a performance piece. She was no longer just Chloe the real estate agent, she was Chloe the visionary, the disruptor, the future CEO. There were pictures of her staring thoughtfully out of cafe windows, a laptop open to a blank page with captions like, "Visualize your highest self, then show up as her." There were selfies in her car captioned, "The hustle never stops." It was all a carefully curated illusion funded by my adequate 9-to-5 job. She once posted a picture of her and Julian, their heads close together over a stack of papers. The caption read, "Find a mentor who sees your potential, not your limitations." The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with a knife. My limitation, of course, was my unwillingness to hand over my inheritance to a con artist. But her arrogance, fueled by my silence, was building towards its inevitable catastrophic peak. The engagement party. We had planned it months ago, a classy affair at a rooftop restaurant for our closest friends and family. About a week before the event, she sat me down on the sofa, taking my hands in hers with a look of profound seriousness. "Liam," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sincerity, "I think we need to invite Julian to the party." I pretended to be surprised. "Your mentor to our engagement party." "Yes," she said, her eyes wide. "Think about it. It's the perfect opportunity for him to finally meet Dad. They can talk business. It will show my family that we are a power couple, that we're serious about building our future." She was framing it as a favor to me, a chance for my future father-in-law to see that I was at last getting on board with the vision. She thought she was playing chess, moving her pieces into position for the final checkmate against my peace mindset. She had no idea she was handing me the queen. "You know what, Chloe?" I said after a moment of feigned contemplation. "That's a brilliant idea. If he's this important to you, then he absolutely should be there." Her smile was blinding. It was the smile of a predator that has successfully cornered its prey. She kissed me a quick, triumphant peck on the cheek. "I knew you'd understand," she whispered. That evening, I watched her as she sat at her desk, gleefully adding Mr. Julian Vance to the guest list. She even picked up the phone to call him personally, her voice a giddy, excited mess. She was so high on her own perceived power, so lost in the illusion of her impending empire, that she never once stopped to ask herself a simple question a data analyst would have asked from the beginning. Why was her quiet, analytical peace fiancé agreeing to all of this so easily? The engagement party was exactly as Chloe had designed it, a performance. It was held on the rooftop terrace of a boutique hotel with panoramic views of the city lights. String lights twinkled overhead, a jazz trio played softly in the corner, and waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everyone was dressed in expensive fabrics, laughing expensive laughs. It was a perfect picture of success, a living, breathing Instagram post, and I had paid for all of it. Chloe was in her element, flitting between groups, a champagne flute permanently attached to her hand. She was wearing a white, backless dress that had cost more than my first car. She looked radiant. She looked triumphant. She introduced Julian to her father with a flourish, calling him her secret weapon. Her father, Robert, a man I respected for his business acumen, shook Julian's hand, intrigued. I watched them from across the terrace, standing next to the bar. They were talking about growth, about portfolios, about risk and reward. Julian was a master salesman, and Robert was listening intently. I felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of a strange, detached pity for Robert. He was being sold a lie by his own daughter. After about an hour, Robert tapped a glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. He gave a heartfelt speech about his daughter, about family, and about welcoming a new son into their lives. He talked about my stability, my loyalty, my quiet strength. "Liam is the anchor every ship needs," he said, and everyone applauded. He had no idea how right he was. I was the anchor, and I was about to stop this particular ship from sailing headfirst into an iceberg. He raised his glass. "To Liam and Chloe," the crowd echoed. "To Liam and Chloe." Then it was my turn. Chloe squeezed my hand as I walked to the small makeshift stage. "Don't be nervous," she whispered. "Just be charming." I smiled at her. "I'll do my best." I stepped up to the microphone. The faces of our 50 closest friends and family members looked up at me, smiling expectant. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. "And thank you, Robert, for those incredibly kind words. I'm a lucky man to be joining your family." I paused, letting the warmth of the moment settle in. I looked directly at Chloe. She was beaming. Over the past few months, I continued, Chloe has taught me so much. She has taught me about the importance of having a vision, of thinking big, of not being afraid to build an empire. A few of her friends who knew the story chuckled knowingly. She was concerned that I was too peace, too content with my quiet, stable life. And she was right to be concerned. So tonight, in the spirit of ambition and big visions, I wanted to share a little business proposal of my own. A project I've been working on in secret. I'd like to present to you all the foundation of Chloe's new empire. I clicked a small remote in my hand. Behind me, a large projector screen, which everyone assumed was for a slideshow of our happy couple photos flickered to life. But it wasn't a picture of us on a beach. It was a crisp, corporate-looking PowerPoint slide. The silence that fell over the party was immediate and absolute. The first slide was simple, written in a clean sans serif font. It read Project Empire, a due diligence, and risk analysis. I heard a confused murmur sweep through the crowd. Chloe's smile faltered. I clicked the remote again. The next slide was titled Key Stakeholders' Personal and Professional Overlap. Below it were two photos side by side. The first was the professional headshot of Julian from his fake website. The second was a grainy, zoomed-in shot taken by the private investigator. It showed Chloe and Julian 2 weeks prior exiting a hotel, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. A collective gasp went through the room. I saw Chloe's mother, Susan, put a hand to her mouth. Chloe herself looked like she had been struck by lightning. As you can see, I said calmly, my voice amplified by the microphone, the synergy between the key stakeholders is significant. I clicked again. The third slide, Principal Partner Background Check Julian Vance. It was a screenshot of a public records database. A mugshot of Julian from 7 years ago was displayed prominently. Next to it, a list of his greatest hits. Fraudulent Investment Scheme 2018. Convicted. Embezzlement from a former employer 2020. Plead down to a misdemeanor. Currently under investigation for another real estate scam in a neighboring state. Julian, who was standing near the back, went white as a sheet. He started to inch towards the exit. But my best man Mark and my cousin, who are both built like refrigerators, casually moved to block his path. I didn't even look at him, I just clicked the remote. The next slide was the most complex. Financial Analysis, the Oasis Project. I had spent a weekend putting this together. It was a beautiful, brutal dissection of their scam. I showed how the property deeds they were using were forged. I displayed a map showing the land they claimed to be developing was actually a protected wetland. I presented a flowchart demonstrating how the initial investment, my $50,000, was designed to be funneled through 3 shell corporations before disappearing into an offshore account. Robert, Chloe's father, who had been on the verge of investing $200,000 himself, looked physically ill. He stared at his daughter, his face a mask of utter betrayal. Chloe was no longer looking at the screen. She was staring at me, her face contorted with a mixture of hatred and panic. Her empire was crumbling to dust in front of her eyes. I took a deep breath. As you can see, the data suggested that this was not a sound investment. I clicked the remote one last time. The final slide appeared. It was simple, clean, and devastating. It was a screenshot of a bank transfer, a single line item. Payee Sterling Protective and Investigative Services, amount $5,000. Memo due diligence. I lowered the microphone. Chloe was right. I said, my voice returning to a normal conversational tone that somehow carried across the shocked silence of the terrace. I was too peace to invest in her empire, so I invested in the truth instead. The sound of the final click from my remote echoed in the dead silence. For a moment, nobody moved. It was like a photograph. 50 people frozen in a state of collective shock, their faces illuminated by the stark white of the final slide. Then, the photograph came to life in chaotic, glorious fragments. Julian was the first to break. His conman instinct screamed, flight. He didn't run. He tried to melt into the background, a snake shedding its skin, making a desperate, quiet beeline for the service exit. But my best man, Mark, who works in construction and has shoulders like a linebacker, simply took one step to his left. He didn't touch Julian, he just became a wall. My cousin did the same on the other side. Julian was boxed in a rat in a very expensive trap. But my eyes were on Chloe. Her face had cycled through a universe of emotions in 60 seconds: shock, disbelief, rage, and now something else. A hollow, vacant terror. The look of a queen whose castle had just dissolved into sand around her. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her friends, the ones who had been clinging to her all night, the ones laughing at her jokes about my adequacy, were now physically distancing themselves from her as if her failure was contagious. They weren't looking at her with pity, they were looking at her with the cold calculation of social survival, their eyes saying, "I don't know her." Her father, Robert, was the most terrifying to watch. He wasn't yelling, he was unnervingly calm. He walked slowly, deliberately over to Julian. He didn't speak to Chloe. He didn't even look at her. He just stood in front of Julian, his face carved from granite, and said something too low for me to hear. But I saw Julian, Flinch saw him start to tremble. Then Robert turned, walked back to his wife, and said, "Susan, we're leaving." He walked past Chloe as if she were a piece of furniture. His own daughter. Her world didn't just crack, it evaporated. And to understand why it happened so fast, you need to understand a concept called social capital. To understand why Chloe's life collapsed so quickly after I left, you have to understand the concept of social capital. There are two types: bonding capital, which is built on genuine trust and affection, and bridging capital, which comes from superficial relationships based on utility and image. My social capital, though small, was bonding capital, like my friend Mark, who would help me move without asking why. Chloe's entire network, on the other hand, was bridging capital. Her friends were the people who came to the party I paid for, admired the penthouse I was paying for, and connected with her for the opportunity she represented. When the financial foundation and the image I provided disappeared, her social capital vaporized instantly. Those friends weren't betraying her, they were simply acting according to the nature of the relationship. When the utility is gone, the connection is terminated. It's a hard lesson about building a life on surface-level values instead of genuine human connection. And I watched that lesson play out in real time. As Robert and Susan walked out the rest of the party, guests took it as their cue. There was no grand exodus. It was a quiet, brutal shunning, people avoiding her eyes, murmuring excuses about an early morning slipping away into the night. Within 10 minutes, the terrace that had been buzzing with 50 people was nearly empty. It was just me, Chloe, the two human walls guarding Julian, and the catering staff who were pretending to be intensely interested in clearing glasses. The jazz trio had stopped playing long ago. The hotel security arrived, alerted by one of the waiters. They were professional, discreet. They spoke to Julian, who was now just a deflated suit, all his bluster gone. He didn't resist. He knew the game was over. As they escorted him out, he looked at Chloe one last time, not with anger, but with a look of pure contempt. The look of a failed con artist for his incompetent accomplice. Finally, it was just her, standing alone in the middle of her own ruined engagement party. The string lights were still twinkling, the city skyline was still beautiful, but her empire was nothing more than a ghost on a projector screen. She had built her entire world on a foundation of paper, and I had just introduced a single drop of rain. I didn't stay to watch the aftermath. I didn't need to. The data had been presented, the conclusion was self-evident. I walked over to the table where we had been seated, the one meant to be the head table of our future. I took the $8,000 engagement ring off my finger. It felt surprisingly light. I placed it gently next to an untouched glass of champagne, a silent final transaction. Then I walked away. I didn't look back at Chloe. I didn't need to see her face to know what was there. I had already run that simulation in my head 100 times. I just walked out of the restaurant, past the stunned staff, and into the cool night air. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I was just empty. But it was a clean, peaceful emptiness. The feeling of a hard drive that's just been wiped clean, ready for a new operating system. My new life began the next day. I moved out of the penthouse we had shared and into a smaller one-bedroom apartment downtown. It was half the size, but it was all mine. There were no ghosts of broken promises in the corners, no lingering scent of her expensive perfume. The first morning I sat by the window with a simple cup of black coffee, watching the sun rise over the city. It was quiet, so incredibly quiet. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't realized. I'd lost myself. I started coding again in my spare time, not for my job, but for me. A small passion project, a little piece of an algorithm I'd always wanted to build. It was pointless, it had no monetary value. It was just for the joy of creating something logical and clean. It was my version of an empire, small, structured, and entirely my own. While my world was getting smaller and more peaceful, Chloe's was imploding. The fallout was swift and brutal, a cascading failure in a poorly designed system. The consequences came for her one after another. Julian was arrested that very night. The hotel security held him until the police arrived. His history of fraud meant he was denied bail. He turned on Chloe immediately, telling the authorities she was a willing co-conspirator, hoping for a lighter sentence. Her father, Robert, a man who valued his reputation above all else, disowned her. Not with a dramatic phone call, but with a cold corporate email from his lawyer instructing her to cease all contact. He saw her not as a daughter who made a mistake, but as a failed investment that was now a liability to his brand. Her mother, Susan, followed his lead. The friends who had surrounded her at the party, they blocked her number. In the world they lived in, public failure was the only unforgivable sin. The bank froze the joint account she shared with her parents. Her credit cards were canceled. And the final, most poetic piece of karma, Robert, using the evidence from my presentation, filed a civil suit against Julian to recoup the $20,000 he had already invested in their fake project, and he named Chloe as a co-defendant, forcing her to legally fight her own father in court. She lost her job, she lost her friends, she lost her family, she lost the penthouse, she lost the lie she had been living. She had wanted to build an empire. She ended up alone in a kingdom of rubble with a mountain of legal bills. Her empire had a sunset. My quiet life was having a sunrise. The contrast became my new reality. I'd wake up to the morning sun streaming through my window, the only sound being the gentle hum of my computer. I'd read that Chloe had a court appearance, that her car had been repossessed. I'd go for a run along the river, feeling the simple burn in my lungs, and I'd see a headline that Chloe was now selling her designer bags on a secondhand app to pay her legal fees. I was building something small and real. She was desperately trying to liquidate the remnants of a life that was never really hers in the first place. She had called me peace. And she was right. I was content, because my contentment was real. Her empire was a fantasy. And when the sun came up, the fantasy was gone. A week ago, a text came through from an unknown number. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. The desperate rambling preview on my lock screen was enough. Something about being sorry, something about being lost. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel anything. I just pressed down, swiped left, and deleted. Some data isn't worth analyzing. That night, sitting in my new quiet apartment, I thought about her word for me, peace. Content, stable. She meant it as the ultimate insult, a synonym for mediocre, for a lack of ambition, but she was wrong. My contentment wasn't a lack of ambition, it was the presence of self-respect. It was the quiet confidence to know that a solid foundation is worth more than a castle in the sky. My logic, which she saw as a cage, was actually my key. It was the tool that allowed me to see through her performance, to analyze the faulty data of her promises, and to execute a plan that protected me. She was chasing a fantasy, an empire built on lies and other people's money. I was just living in reality. And in the end, reality always wins. It's easy to feel vindicated when your plan works perfectly. The takedown at the party was clean, the consequences for her were severe, and I walked away with my assets and my dignity intact. But a question lingered in my mind. What if it hadn't gone so smoothly? What if, after I walked away, my life had gotten harder? What if I had struggled financially? Would my decision still have been the right one? The answer is yes, absolutely yes. We have a tendency to judge a decision based on whether it worked out. It's called outcome bias. But the true value of my action wasn't revealed on that projector screen. It was solidified in that restaurant in the moment I chose my own self-worth over her toxic validation. The victory wasn't about exposing her. It was about saving myself. The financial success and the peace that followed were just bonuses. The real win, the one that truly matters, had already happened the second I chose to respect myself enough to walk away from someone who didn't. And that's the peace I feel now. It isn't the loud, triumphant peace of a conqueror, it's the quiet, steady peace of a builder. This morning, I woke up early. The sun was streaming through the window of my small apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I made coffee, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. There on the screen was the side project I'd started. A simple, elegant piece of code. It won't make me a billionaire. It won't get me featured in a magazine. It won't be an empire she could brag about at parties, but it's logical, it's clean, and it's mine.